Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl. This is Funny Wine Girl, aka Jenny Luby. And I know I say this all the time with my podcast, but like time is just rolling on. We're already into May and I'm planning things for June and July. And I had someone ask me about availability in September, and I'm like, oh boy. I mean, we're really looking ahead. But it's funny because that's been part of my life for a really long time. Like, especially when you're in communications and you're promoting events and I produce my own comedy shows and things, you're always kind of like looking ahead, which sometimes gets in the way of focusing on today and the moments. And a lot of us have challenges with that. But that's not really the topic of today. I just kind of had that on my mind, but I hope everyone's doing well. And the topic today I'm going to get into is really about women in sports, coaching, athletes. I'll admit I'm not someone who's athletic at all. I struggled to get out of my sports bra. I was a kid who was made to ride her bike. I was not athletic at all, but I am interested, of course, in women empowerment of all kinds and seeing the success and fame of Caitlin Clark, who is just signed to the Indiana Fever, Women's Basketball Association, WBA. Seeing more people watching and enjoying women's sports, I think is great. So knowing that I had someone I could talk to about that, I was like, we need to discover. We need to really delve into this topic. So I'd like to introduce my guest this week. I always share how I know people. So my guest today is Tara Macciocco, and Tara is the sister of a previous guest, Jenna Urban. We spoke, oh gosh, I feel like it's been a while, maybe last year. And Jenna is fabulous. She's in social media. She is in all kinds of things. We talked about how she was pivoting at the time when she was on my show, helping her husband with his landscape and shed business. And Jenna just spoke at the Empower conference that was put on by the chamber. And there I got to chat with Tara. And I said, I'd love to have you on the podcast. And she was really good natured and agreed. So here we are. So welcome, Tara.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Me too. I was like, your name popped into my head when I've been watching like Caitlin Clark, seeing her name, and I'm like, I've been wanting to talk about this topic, but I really honestly I didn't. And this is part of what we could talk about today. I didn't know a lot of women coaches, professional women, and professional, I guess you could say professional women in sports. And so knowing you, I'm like, okay, here's the perfect opportunity. But before we get into all of that, like the heart of the matter, why don't you share a little bit, just so my listeners, because it's not just about, we mentioned your sister, but you're you, right? You're not
Yeah,
your
yeah.
sister. So let's learn about you, Tara.
So it's funny because my sister and I are really like two total opposites. We did a lot of the same things growing up, but we kind of our paths have gone kind of two separate ways. Hence our podcast, Soul Sisters, kind of traveling two different paths, but still kind of delving into similar areas. But I was a basketball player, and that's kind of like I hate to say it, but my identity was a basketball player, a basketball coach. Grew up in a basketball family. Played high school basketball for my father, who was a coach for 35 years at Dunmore High School. I was pretty good back in the day. Was afforded a full athletic scholarship to Penn State University. So I played 3 years in the Big Ten at Penn State. Graduated from Penn State and had a year of eligibility left and couldn't let that go to waste. So I finished my last year of eligibility at Lock Haven University, which is Division II school. I played a year there, and then that's kind of when I got into coaching. My second year that I was there, I was the grad assistant and started to get into some instruction on court, but also the recruiting part, which I absolutely love because that's like the building relationships part. Um, and from that point forward, for the last 20 plus years, I have been on the coaching side of things. Um, I've been to all different schools, kind of traveled around the area a little bit. I started at Wilkes as an assistant, moved to Marywood as a head coach and an administrator. I was also an assistant director of athletics, and then went back to Wilkes just to be a coach. So I had an opportunity to kind of remove all those other hats. Spent 5 years there, and now I am currently back at Marywood. So I've kind of made my rounds, but in the middle of all of that, you hate to say that like your identity as a sport, right? That's everybody that kind of I talk to is like, oh, you're the basketball player. You're the basketball player. Yes, that's great, but there's a lot more to us as athletes as well. So this year I kind of tried to dabble in some other areas. I'm currently finishing a semester of teaching at Keystone College in the sport and recreation management program. I was a recreation management major when I was at Penn State. So very similar to basketball, the classroom, the court is my classroom when I'm coaching basketball, but the classroom is your classroom in the academic side of things. So did a little bit of the teaching this year too, but missed the basketball part. But this past year, while I was teaching at Keystone, I was given a really unique opportunity. I had one of the men's basketball players in my class, and working back and forth with him, trying to help him through a project and an assignment, started speaking to Andrew Kettle, who was the men's basketball coach at Keystone, about this student. And he said, you know what? As we're talking back and forth, what do you think about coaching on the men's side? And I was like, that's really cool. There's not very many women. I think the percentage is about 5% in men's college basketball that there's women involved on the coaching side of it. So I said, absolutely. This is like a very unique opportunity for a female to kind of cross genders and get into a whole different area. So I spent this past year with the men's team, and it was unbelievable. It was a great experience. Made me want to get in back into coaching, which is now leading me back to Marywood to go back to my original position as the head women's basketball coach.
Wow. That's awesome. You said something interesting there that I don't think you even have to be an athlete to relate to. Like you said, your identity, you hate to say it, but
Mhm,
it's basketball. And I think,
mhm,
as I mentioned at the beginning, I am not athletic at all. It's funny, I'm a late bloomer, but I mean, I got into running, and even
mhm.
then it wasn't competitive. I was thrilled when a lot of people in my age group didn't show up so I could occasionally win a medal. And I was like, I'll still take the damn medal. I don't care if it's raining and that's why people are home in bed. But a lot of people, I think I hear that from my friends who are moms too. It's like, having feeling like they lost their own identity, that they're a
Mhm,
mom, or there's, that's Tommy's mom. And I think that does happen to a lot of women. And a lot
mhm.
of people, like you mentioned, like athletes, that you're known for it. And unfortunately, people maybe only get to know that one side of you that's always in the
Yeah.
newspaper, or, that's always seen out in public.
Mhm.
Would you say that you're like, now that you're a grown up, so to speak, because that was, I'm sure it's harder when you're younger. I mean, I'm still
Mhm.
at 52 trying to find my identity in many ways, but do you find it now, like, especially in your position to teach and
Mhm.
to educate, and like, do you try to remind, I'm sure you do, with the students about that life balance so that they're not just the sport? Because I mean,
Yeah.
not to sound dark, but anytime an injury could take it away, and then you don't want to
Mhm.
just be like, who am I? I mean, you're still
Yeah.
a valuable human being, but you need to know that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think as a teacher, and we're a teacher of everything that we do, right? If we're in, whether it's coaching, you're actually in a classroom, you're trying to encourage everybody to make sure that you're getting involved in as many things as you possibly can. So any of the athletes that I do work with, whether it's coaching them or teaching them, I'm trying to make sure that they're getting themselves out on campus, getting involved in clubs and organizations. If there's a theater performance, go try that out. If there's we've had athletes that were in marching band, which is awesome that they have that musical ability too, to make sure that they're taking advantage of all the other things aside from the sport. Because you're right. I mean, you could at any moment, somebody could go down with a career-ending injury, and now what are you going to do? What are you going to fall back on? What are the things that you've done? But one of the things I think that I have really kind of, over the last probably 5 years or so, as you start to grow up, I guess you would call it, is the leadership thing, the leadership segment. And I think I've really, really started to enjoy much more learning about leadership techniques, how to help lead groups, how to help people become better leaders. And I think that's one of the things that I'm going to focus on a lot more this time around as a head coach, is teaching those young women how to become strong, empowered, career driven women that you walk in a room, and whether it's into we watched Patrice Banks go into a completely male dominated world, or you're walking into a female dominated world. Either way, making sure that you are confident, you are strong, you have all of those skills that you were taught throughout your college career, and you're confident in those, and you walk in and know that you belong there, and you're not just a mechanic. You're not just a comedian. You're not just a coach, a teacher. You're so many more things. And I think that leadership part of it is so key, because I think it helps bring a lot of different values and skills out in people.
Yeah. And that is so important. I think this generation, I think people who are leading them and them themselves do a better job of it than like I'm a little older than you, but Gen X, I mean, my gosh, there's so many, and I'm not blaming anyone. It's just the
Mhm.
time, right? We weren't like to be a leader or taught like I was a little bit of a tomboy because I had an older
Mhm.
brother. So I'd play like wrestling with him, things like that. So I was like, I wasn't dainty, that's for sure. But like in
Mhm.
our generation, we weren't really taught about, stand up for yourself, be empowered,
No.
be leaders, have a
Mhm.
seat at the table. And I think I believe we're doing a better job. We still have a far way to go, but I
Mhm.
think this generation is much more working toward making things better.
Yeah, and I mean, you even look at like I know we're gonna talk a lot about Caitlin Clark, and she's a hot topic right now, not just in the sports world. But you talk about Caitlin Clark, she's not just a basketball player. The things that she is doing for sport in general, for women in general, for the young boys are wearing her jerseys. She's doing so many things, and think about the pressure on that young lady. Every time she's out in public, every time she has a speaking engagement, she has to be at her best at all times. And the minute that she's not, she's going to get crucified. And that's tough. That's a tough position to put a 19 to 23-year-old student in, whatever male or female. Um, so I think you're exactly right. Though when we were growing up, it wasn't like that. I could remember, getting to college, and Penn State was a big school, and it was a when I got to school there, it was I think the team was number one in the country the year before, so they were very well known. But we were just thrown into the fire. If somebody came up and asked us questions, you just answered them. Now they're going through media training, how to answer certain questions, what's the appropriate thing to say, what not to say. We didn't have that growing up. So those are the leadership things too that you kind of refer back to that people might not think are, considered leadership, but it is.
Yeah,
But yeah, we
absolutely.
were we were we were just thrown into things.
Thrown to the wolves,
And it
right?
was like, go figure it out for yourself. And if you said the wrong thing, you were just kind of told that you shouldn't have said that. Now you're being coached on everything you say. Mhm.
Yeah. Now, did you, excuse me, I did go to Penn State too. Did you play under, was it
I did, yeah.
Rini
Yep.
Portland? Was it?
Rainy Portland. Yep.
Portland.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. And believe me, I
Yes.
do not
Yep.
follow the only sports I really
Yeah.
follow is Penn State because I went to Penn State and I do remember her
Okay.
because she had a good record, I believe, right? A really good record.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 I mean, she was a very, very successful coach, and, um, you know, won a lot of championships, but then she was very crucified towards the end of her career as well. Like, there was a lot of things that, the media went after her for. There were players that went after her for certain things, and there's a group of players that kind of decide not to play at some point. Like with my class, I think there was 4 of us that left, my junior year, decided to leave and not finish playing there, all 4 for different reasons. But then classes after that, there was lawsuits, there was things that she went through as well that were just things that you wouldn't necessarily think of as a coach that you would have to deal with. But yeah, she had a great career at Penn State.
Yeah, I thought, and it's funny you say that because I didn't really follow it, but I kind of feel like toward the end, maybe her reputation was a little bit tarnished there.
Yeah,
And I don't know what the accusations or whatever were, but
yeah,
I do think that women are under greater scrutiny, especially in careers that are dominated by men,
hmm
and that is
hmm
changing, but I don't think it's changed completely. And along those lines, you mentioned Caitlin Clark, and that was kind of what brought this up. And I've been wanting to talk about this topic for a while because, again, I don't really follow a lot of sports, but I mean, I'll see stories. And Megan Rapinoe, who is a
hmm
soccer player, I mean, I know she got an injury, I think last year or so. I think that ended her career, if I'm not mistaken. But
hmm
she was very vocal. So, I mean, you didn't even really need to follow soccer, women's soccer, to know that she was out there fighting for equality in pay.
hmm
And, I mean, she did speak on politics, which I know people don't like or whatever, but she was really well known, and
hmm
people knew who she was and everything. And so that got me. I mean, I've always been, aware of where, women, we do not get paid equally, but I think she really kind of gave a voice to it. But now seeing this year, I just kind of like really paid attention to the people watching women's sports. I was looking up the statistics, and again, I don't know if I have the best source,
hmm
but it seems like it's been on the rise the past few years as far as viewership during March
hmm
Madness with those games. This year, however, was the highest. I guess from 2022 was at like 4.8 million viewers.
Mm.
2023 went up to almost 10, and then it nearly doubled again in 2024. It's like 18.8, and then I think on ESPN it was like up to 24
Mhm.
million viewers watching, I think, South Carolina play Iowa, where
Yeah.
Caitlin Clark plays for. What would you say, just from your stance, and obviously someone who's playing the sport, you want to watch
Mhm.
women's sports and you want them to succeed, but technically, I shouldn't say technically, but generally speaking, for years, women's sports was never given its due.
Mm.
And I mean, like we go back to our day and even younger, people used to say as an insult, right? Like you run like a girl, you throw like a
Yep.
girl, you fight like a girl, which is, now it's like, yeah, okay, come here, let me give you a punch and see how you think that feels. But now that
Mhm.
that kind of stuff we don't say anymore, but we're still seeing there is still an imbalance. What would you say is the reason that people are finally watching women's sports and that it has increased by quite a bit?
I think in terms of a basketball perspective, the game has become so much more exciting for people to watch. Somebody like a Caitlin Clark, for example, does things that you don't see either male or female doing. The closest person to Caitlin Clark would probably be Steph Curry. Because what she does is she shoots the ball from really, really deep on the court. She shoots threes that are probably 3 pointers that are probably 20 feet back, 10 feet back. And they call her logo threes. That's what they say every time she goes to shoot it. So everybody kind of caught on to this. And it started as her freshman year, which was her COVID year. So people don't even realize, because a lot of the games you couldn't go to the games. If you were lucky to have them televised to watch her play at the time, how many games locally would we see Iowa play? Not very many, unless you had the Big Ten network and you were paying for extra subscriptions. But she was doing that from her freshman year. And it just so happens that, like as the years kind of went on, you start to see her putting up, 35, the triple doubles, 35, 12, 10. Then she's putting up 40-point games. Then she's putting up 49-point games. And everybody's like, who is this? And the minute they watch her, the first time they watch her, they're hooked, because every time she has the ball in her hands, you're thinking, is she going to pull up? When is she going to pull up? Is it going to go in? Is it not going to go in? It just became so much more exciting. But it wasn't just her. I mean, she's the one that gets a lot of the media attention right now because of she's the number one pick in the draft. She just signed, I think, a $28 million contract with Nike to get her own signature shoe. She breaks all of the NCAA scoring records. So she's kind of the one that's been in the spotlight. But if you think back, you had a Diana Taurasi. If I'm saying some of the names, hopefully you recognize some of the names that I'll say. But Diana Taurasi played at Connecticut, and she was putting up some big numbers as well. And she was very different in the way she played. She's very Italian, very strong, very very strong personality. Talked with her hands, kind of got in the official's face a little bit. Her and Gino, who the coaches at Connecticut, they had some like battles that like were made public in the media. But she was one of the first ones. Her, Maya Moore. You talk about Candace Parker, who just recently retired. There's so many players that helped Caitlin Clark be able to do what she did today. And I just think that everybody says it. You put a game on it, it's like the Caitlin Clark effect. How cool is that? That it's a woman creating this media frenzy to the point where I think I just read the Indiana Fever. 34 of their 40 games are going to be on national television. That's never happened before. Most of the years you have to buy a WNBA league pass to be able to even watch the games. They're not really televised all that often. I think the league pass is $34 for the summer, but 34 of their 40 games will be nationally televised because of her. There's I think the game they're playing in Vegas, they're moving into a larger arena. They normally play in a 12,000 seat arena. They're moving into a 20,000 seat arena, and they're selling these out because of one player. It's wild the effect that she has had on the game. But I do think it's mostly because of the excitement level, because she's different. She does things differently than anybody has ever done it before on the women's side.
Yeah. And people listening could say, like you're saying now, she's not the only one. There were people before her, there'll be people after her. But I mean, you have to give hats off. You got to give props to the
Mhm.
whoever it is that finally wakes people up, right? And
Mhm.
finally pushes the knob and makes things that will be different now, maybe going forward. Now, yeah, there's not going to be maybe another Caitlin Clark for a while or plays like she does, but getting people's attention, getting them watching, having those little boys wearing a jersey with her
Mhm.
number on it. That's big. I mean, that's really big. We can't ignore that. You mentioned the Nike deal. It's interesting because I was looking at up her contract. Now, I thought again, if this is from a good source, her contract was surprisingly low. I thought. I mean, I
Mhm.
could be wrong. The source I saw for 3 years was like it was like under half a million. I think I want to say it was
Yep.
like 380,000 for 3 years. And I mean, I was just curious. Again, I don't really follow a lot of sports. I do. I will say
Yeah.
basketball is one of my favorite though, because it's so fast paced. I believe this. This is what I've always said. Anything live and in person is fun and exciting, right? I'll
Mhm.
go to a baseball game. I'll go to a hockey game.
Mhm.
But otherwise, I don't really like to watch them like Penn State football and maybe other basketball because it is exciting. But like hockey, too much fighting. And I don't love how people cheer for fighting. That just, I'm just like, okay. And then baseball, it's nice, but gosh, do I get bored? I gotta
Yeah.
say. But I was just curious. I looked up Kobe Bryant. Now, God rest his soul, may he rest in
Mhm.
peace. But his in 1996, it said he had $3.5 million 3 year contract,
Mhm.
and now she's getting under half a million for 3 years.
Yeah.
So I know that might not seem like a fair comparison, and you might know the statistics better on this. So it's great that she's gotten a deal with Nike. That's nice, but the pay clearly is not equal for
Yeah.
women athletes. We have a hell of a long way to go.
Mhm.
What would you have any input on that or just thoughts on that?
So now one of the things that's a little bit different is the WNBA season is only a 40 game season. It's pretty much met second week of May to beginning of September, spread out through there. There's an All-Star weekend in the middle. The NBA, I think, plays 120 games. So a
Okay.
little bit different in terms of the number of games, but it still is not, if you figure it out, dollars per hour and things like that. It's nowhere near comparison. But the salaries in the WNBA, I think the maximum salary she was getting, and I want to say it's around 70,000 a year, 75,000 a year. I think her last year, the third year of the contract, might be 94,000 and maxed out at that. But that's high. That's kind of where they're at for that league. I do think that you'll see in the next couple of years, because of her and because of the class that came with her, you'll start to see those go up. I think that there'll be a lot more sponsors that come on board with the teams. If you see, and if you've seen any of the pictures of the jerseys, you'll notice all of their jerseys have sponsors on them, which is not, you don't see too often on the NBA side, but a lot of sponsors. And I think the Indiana Fever just got one with, I can't remember the name of the company. I just saw a picture of it. It's up in the corner, but they just got a pretty big sponsorship deal with this organization that I think you'll start to see those salaries go up a little bit. But where the women have to, what the women have to do because of these salaries is, come September, October, they now leave and go overseas and play. So that's where they make their money. Like they make much more money playing overseas, but they shouldn't have to be doing that to pack up and move. So they're living in two different countries throughout the year to play a sport that the guys are playing just in the United States, making that kind of money. Um, and most of her money too. I don't know the exact numbers, but she was getting unbelievable NIL deals, the name, image, and likeness for NCAA athletes. Now they can make money on themselves um, through different things. There's car dealerships that are giving people cars and a lot of things. But she was making a ton of money through those that will now probably double because of her notoriety. And the other thing I want to mention about Caitlin, if you've listened to her interviews, not only is she doing this on the court, when she's interviewed, she is very good. She's very, very respectful. She's very well spoken. The first thing she says is she thanks and congratulates anybody other than her. She always gives credit where credit is due. She's very, very humble, which I think also makes her a really, really hot commodity.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
Because you
not
see, you
always
see
the
some of the, you
case.
see some of
Yeah.
the athletes like, no, I mean, like you see, and I hate to talk poorly about any other athletes, but you compare her and an Angel Reese, and you see the difference in the way they kind of act when they're being interviewed, or the way they're acting on the court. Now, granted, Caitlin had her moments where she did some things back, but it's just different personalities, and you could see it with, there's a Haley Van Lith, who's one of the highest paid NIL athletes. She just left. She went from Louisville to LSU, and now she's going to TCU. A lot of it has to do with money. A lot of it has to do with playing time, but she's the same way too. Like during the NCAA tournament, you see images of her, because she's not playing, on the bench crying. during a game and pouting. And you just don't really see that often from Caitlin. So I think it makes her an even stronger role model.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's I mean, that makes me wanna root for her more when I hear that kind of thing because you do want someone that's like I don't know, like poor sportsmanship I just don't love. And I mean, this just because this popped into my head, I think of the Super Bowl with is it Kelsey, the one that's dating, what's her Taylor Swift. Yeah, I know. How could I not know, right? Probably because I don't have a teenage daughter, although I do like her music. But like to me, like when he bumped into the coach and kind of like pushed him back a little. I know a lot of people are like, well, it's a high emotion game and all that. And I don't really honestly feel one way or the other about him. But I do think that excusing certain behavior because of emotions is not a good tactic to take. I mean, just because, if we say that about anything, is anyone allowed to push anybody? Probably not,
Mhm.
unless there's somebody special. You know what I mean? I don't think you can go
Yeah,
push your boss or go, you just can't, you know what I
yeah.
mean? Or like, I don't know. So I think behavior, especially when so many people are watching, is important
Mhm,
because there are a lot of young people watching too that are the next whoever, or maybe
mhm.
not in sports, but just see that behavior and they might look up to
Yeah,
you.
yeah, and she did, and I don't know how much of the NCAA tournament that you watched, but I think it was in the semifinal game. She got pretty frustrated, and she took the ball and she bounced the ball off her head. At one point, she turned and looked at her father, and her father in the stands looked at her and said, "Knock it off." And she talked about it. She talked about it after the game, and there's also a funny video kind of circulating of her and Kate Martin, who was one of her teammates who got drafted by the Vegas Aces, and their coach Lisa Bluter getting interviewed after a game, and they're talking about how Lisa Bluter started giving out technical fouls in practice because of Caitlin Clark, just to get her to kind of learn to kind of keep her emotions in check a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And it's again, if we talk stereotypes through the years, it's always women thought to be, so much more emotional. And, I've said this before in the podcast, but obviously I haven't resolved it. So it's still in my head and bothers me. One of my relatives who is who's in the law enforcement, we talked about a certain election in 2016 and, whatever people's politics are. As a woman, you always, I think most of us do want to at some point see a woman president. It's kind of crazy because it's like saying, hey, you can be anything except president of the United States. Okay. So for me, I was teaching and I remember that day after the election for a lot of reasons. I was disappointed, but like to not, I was disappointed and emotional. And I had a couple tears escape, and having my cousin who's in law enforcement tell me that was unprofessional and emotional. I was like, it still bothers me that I didn't kind of have a longer conversation with them because I'm like, well, given my 7 years of teaching, I never did that before in my life. And here's the deal: had she gotten to become president, that would be history, being made and
Mhm.
breaking. So if I can't show that I'm human through a little tears, I didn't sob for the class. There were
Yeah.
other young women in the class who were kind of like with it. And then I said, but what is emotion? When a cop pushes somebody or beats the crap out of them,
Mhm.
that's emotion too. It's
Mhm.
just that it's anger. It's not tears, but they're still both emotional. And I think
Yeah.
through the years, women have gotten a bad rap for that. It's like, well, emotion isn't just crying, it's a lot of things.
Mhm. You know what? You see that so much though on the court, the field, whatever it might be, the difference between how women are kind of depicted compared to male athletes. A woman in basketball scores and gets an and one and yells and one, and the official's telling her that's a warning. Where the guys are like chest bumping each other and getting in each other's faces, and like they let so much more go on the men's side in terms of the emotional part of it. And I see the same thing on the sidelines. I could be on the sideline, and there could be a male coach on the opposite sideline that can be in an official's ear, swearing him up and down, telling him he's the worst official in the world. And I say that's terrible, and I'm getting warned from that. And I saw it even this year that the guys get away with a lot more in terms of their emotions with regards to officiating and kind of on court on field play. I think you see it in every sport. You could think back to from back when we were in college and watching the Women's World Cup. And I don't know if you remember the Brandy Chastain when she lifted her shirt up.
Yes, yes.
And that's all everybody talked about. And how often do men do that? Nobody says a word about it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that was yeah, that was like that was the news, right? And it's like, gee, should that
Mhm.
be what we're all talking about at this moment? You know?
Yeah, or the fact that they just won the World Cup, right, for the second, might have been the second time that they had ever won it, but and she was just showing emotion for having scored the goal to win it, and it gets twisted so differently than if that had been a male. And I don't
Yeah.
think that's probably the thing that I think we're still far behind on. We have like I did my master's capstone project on depicting athletes in Sports Illustrated and ESPN the magazine, the difference between how we did that with males and females. I don't know how much that has changed, like little bits, but I don't think it's been too many big strides that we've made with that.
Yeah. And that's unfortunate because it seems like we'll take steps forward in some areas, but staying still practically. And in,
Mhm.
other areas, I almost feel going backwards, but we won't go down that path today.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well, I
it,
mean,
yeah,
you said it earlier too. You said about how like people say, "Well, she shoots like a girl," or you run like a girl, you hit like a girl." You still hear that every now and then. And you're thinking like you said, you want to kind of hit somebody and say, "Oh, do I hit like a girl?" But that's like you want to see that stop, right? And even we're watching. My sister and I are watching the LSU Iowa game with her son and my cousin, who are the same age. They're sixth grade boys, and like just the fact that they're like, oh, that was a lucky shot, and I'm like, how much of this have you watched? A lucky shot because she made a couple shots. You're calling it lucky instead of it being that she put the hours in and did this. Was Steph Curry's shot lucky shot or was no?
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right about that. It's interesting because there's something like through the years that's mocking about that, obviously, like, oh,
Hmm.
don't be like a girl because, and I mean, coming from a comedian standpoint, it's interesting. I will still watch SNL, Saturday Night Live
Hmm.
sketches, and they started doing like a few years ago, actually, maybe even 4 or 5, having female comedians, actors portraying men. And at first, I have to say, I didn't love it. I was like, oh, I don't know. And then I'm like, well, why don't I like it? I should think about this. And it's like, men have played the roles of women. I mean, since what, the Greek times. And
Hmm.
even Milton Berle was a comedian in what, like the late 40s or 50s or whatever. And it was like a joke to dress like a woman or be a woman. And
Hmm.
it's like, so we really, I mean, thankfully we are making some strides, but
Hmm.
we do have a little ways to go for sure.
Hmm.
And you mentioned one I want to ask you a little bit about right before I hit the record button, and it was something I had not thought about, the equality with coaching as well.
Hmm.
Seeing more women or excuse me, women coaches of not just women's teams, but men's teams as well, and in the
Hmm.
NFL. And while it's changing, it still needs to change quite a bit, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I don't know the exact percentages, but I could tell you a couple women that I'm envious of, and are like I look up to, and I've listened to as many podcasts and watched videos. Becky Hammon, who coached with the San Antonio Spurs, she's now with the Las Vegas Aces. Kara Lawson was with the Boston Celtics. She's now the head coach of Duke women's basketball. That had opportunities to coach these men's programs. I'm sure at some point Dawn Staley has been offered or will be offered positions to coach on the men's side, but you don't see that off. You don't see that enough. The flip side of it, you see a lot of males coaching women's sports, and it's across every sport. So I don't know why it hasn't gotten to the point where it's become more normal to see that happen. Um, but having had the opportunity to do it this year here at Keystone to coach with the men, I'm hoping that more women see that and say, "Well, I'm going to go take a shot at that and try." I think a lot of it is probably just being that fear of the rejection or that fear of I don't know if they would give me an opportunity. I wish more women would try and would put themselves out there and just give it a shot to say, give me a chance. Because I think coaching is coaching. You're still doing you're still doing the same thing. You're passionate about what you do. Strategy wise, you're doing the same thing. It's just the personalities might be a little bit different and learning how to motivate men compared to women a little bit differently. But you would think that the women would know how to motivate women a little bit more. I don't know,
Yeah, you
but
would think, right?
but you see it. I just saw somewhere. I think there was a female official that is doing the NBA playoffs, which is she's one of the first female officials to be given NBA playoff games, which is a great thing. I saw During the NFL playoffs, there were some female officials on the field doing that. You see them now more in you know manager positions of different NFL teams, operations directors. We're starting to see a little bit more on the coaching side of it, coming into the NFL side of things. NBA in the NBA, you see it in the lower levels, the G League, the D League. That you'll see some of the women, and then in the summer they get to coach the summer league teams, which kind of gives them that opportunity. But I think we're going to start to see it happen more often, and I think that like people like Becky Hammon really were the trailblazers for that. She was very very good at what she did. The guys really respected her. She was under the right leader in Greg Popovich for the Spurs, and I think he did a great job of mentoring her, but also giving her the opportunity and treating her as an equal. And he talked very very highly about her doing that. So I think she opened the doors there for a lot more people to get into the basketball side of it.
Now, as you were talking, I thought of something that your sister had said when we were on. Now, I mean, teaching at a different level. She said she coached, I think, maybe it was her son's team. I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
And just a little bit of lip or a little bit of backlash from the boys as far as maybe
Mm-hmm.
not respecting or totally giving the credibility where she
Mm-hmm.
deserved it. And I would imagine that, I don't know because I've never been in the position, but I would imagine that can be a challenge with some male players, like thinking, oh, I'm not playing for a girl or for a woman.
Yeah.
I would think that's still kind of a little bit of a challenge. Would you say, or no?
Oh, definitely. I think, having talked to some of the guys here that I coached, I've said to them, I really appreciate how welcoming you were. And they were like, well, we looked at your resume. Well, you would hope that you don't have to look at a resume to do that, but they did, and they knew coming in that I kind of had a background in what I was doing. I had some success. In Jenna's case, she's dealing with like sixth and seventh grade boys that might not necessarily understand that as much. But Jenna probably picked up the ball and ran a spin move and scored on one of them and said, "Yeah, now you're going to respect me a little bit more." Um, but I think now because of them seeing Caitlin Clark and them seeing now more women dunking the ball, more women playing at a different athleticism level. I think they do give a little more credit. It just might take the younger boys a little bit longer to understand it compared to some of the older guys. Um, and they go that I mean, the resume kind of helps in that situation as well. So I know when I first started with them too, I went in and I kind of said, "Here's my background," so that they had an idea before they even were able to kind of ask any questions about that. But in all honesty, I think that happens with some women as well. There's some girls that I've coached that sometimes they just think they know more than you do, and that's hard to overcome on both sides. So you see it with both genders.
Yeah. And I mean, it is unfortunate because I think, again, thinking back to what Jetta and I talked about and like just my own experiences, you don't see that happening as much with men, right? Like they're the coach and they're like, oh, they're just the coach. I mean, they're not
Hmm.
necessarily going to go pull up their resume, but there is
Yep.
some kind of clout that comes with the male gender. And I mean,
Hmm.
that sucks, but we just keep moving on. And like you said, they had looked at
Hmm.
your resume, you told them your background. It's like, should you have to do that? Maybe not. No. But
Hmm.
if it helps you have a good relationship with your players
Hmm.
and succeed and set the tone for like the future seasons, then
Hmm.
let's do it. I mean, it may not be ideal, but we have to make change where we can, how we can, and keep it going.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it goes
Um,
it goes back to that being the confident part too that I talked about it. Being confident in what your ability is and the experience that you have, and making sure that that's the first impression you give to somebody. Whether it's a sixth grader or a 19, 22, 20-year-old college kid. You come in and you act like you belong there, and like you said, you should have a seat at the table, and you act like that. I think the respect is a little bit different.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's something I struggle with because it's like, at 52 I should be over it, but there's still times I'm justifying my behavior, I'm apologizing, and I think women tend to do that a lot, like walking into something
Mhm.
meekly and, we have to get over that because, no one's going to come in and give us like I don't have a fairy godmother that's going to give me a makeover while I'm sleeping. I got to make that change myself. you know.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
teaching confidence and having people like, own their credit and their abilities. I think
Mhm.
that's important. That's great that you're doing that with young people today. um Before we wrap up, and of course there are so many topics, but I don't want to go off too much. I'm like things in my head about like paying college athletes. I want to ask you about that. I mean, there's so many things, but we would be here for like another hour. In this vein of the conversation we've had, is there anything else that you really wanted to say, or to touch upon that we just didn't talk about?
I just think, and my sister and I talk about it all the time. And before we had gotten into the Empower series on the podcast, we were starting to get a little bit more into it. And I think we'll get back to this, but really just making sure that we are teaching young girls to reach for the stars and chase their dreams and like and not be afraid to go after things. I think Dr. Hazuri, I think, talked about you have to ask at the Empower event and making sure that you're asking the question. Don't be afraid to ask for something. All of these things that we as women, I think, have a tendency of sometimes to have that little bit of fear in the back of our head. And we think, well, are we good enough for that? Or should we do this? Or should we try it? Should we go after that job? Should we try out for that team? Should we try that new sport? Whatever it might be, just having the confidence to go give it a try, whether you're successful at it or you're not. You're giving yourself the chance to do it. Don't ever have any regrets. I think looking back, I'm almost 48 years old now, and looking back at some of the things that, like in college, I wish I would have done more things. Like I would have loved to have tried to be a musician and tried to learn how to play an instrument, and I never did it because I was always like, I don't know if I could be good at that. It doesn't matter. Give these things a try, and you're going to get to a point in your life where you can't do any of those things, and you're going to regret the fact that you didn't try to do these. So I think really just chase your dreams. I mean, like things are changing, the times are changing. There's people now in all different places that you talked about possibly having a woman president. Like there's things that can happen as long as you go after it and you actually you put yourself out there and you make yourself a little vulnerable in certain situations and say that this is something I want. I'm going after it. And I just hope that that's something that we continue to encourage these young girls to go after. And I know we're talking all about young girls and women, but that's kind of what Caitlin Clark is about. And she set the tone for all of these generations to come and open the doors for so many more opportunities for them to go and do these things and chase their dreams. And she talked about it all the time. Chase your dreams. She was that little kid that was saying she wanted to play in the WNBA one day. She's there. That she wanted to get a college scholarship. She's there. And just about putting in the time to be able to do it and not be afraid to do that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's funny. I'm just thinking, before I didn't want to make it sound like I'm laughing at like Taylor Swift, because it's funny. She's someone I
Hmm.
actually do respect too. A lot of young girls do. She writes her own songs, she writes her own lyrics. She has
Hmm.
fought Apple, and won
Hmm.
as far as trying to get accessibility to music and things. And yeah, there's a lot of things wrong with that industry that aren't necessarily that have not that's not her fault, like, with the prices of things and everything. But she is someone like young girls do look up to. So the more role models we have, I think it kind of gives permission. Like our generation we're never really told that. And I mean, like you
Hmm.
said, there are so many things I wish if I had that DeLorean from Back to the Future, man, oh boy, I would do a whole bunch of stuff differently. but
Hmm.
but I definitely would, because I was, and I talk about this a lot, whether I'm an introvert or extrovert. I hardly did anything in college other than write for the paper, the Daily Collegian, because my degree's in journalism. And I was a little sister at a fraternity, which other people might go, hey, trust me, it wasn't that. I wasn't really getting around, if you know what I mean. But no, for me, it was about making friends, because I was homesick. And
Hmm.
I was in kind of a dorky, nerdy fraternity, so it seemed to work well. A lot of different personality types, but otherwise, I didn't really try things. And I
Hmm.
wanted to try comedy. I didn't do it until I was in my late 20s. And even then, I did improv when I really wanted to do stand up. And I didn't do that until I was in my early 30s. And I was visiting a friend in Houston because I was afraid to do it here in Pennsylvania. So yeah, not to go off on my foibles, but yeah, to Tara's point, yes, just try things. And you know what? I love that idea of just trying different things, because I mean, it's not even about failing. It's about maybe even recognizing it's not what you want, it's not what you like,
Hmm.
or you do like it and you're not good at it. Well, guess what? keep trying, practice,
Mhm,
watch videos on YouTube, ask questions of people in that profession or in that
mhm,
sport or art or whatever, and you can do it. Yeah, just keep
mhm.
trying and doing things and really just like sampling a lot of things in life. I think that's the key. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about in the beginning, the identity part of it. Don't let your identity define exactly who you are. Find that purpose of what you wanna do and the things that light your soul on fire, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to end. I want to thank you so much, Tara Macciocco, coaching at Marywood. So we'll have to let us know when the season is so we can root on your team. Is that? I have no idea about
Yes.
seasons. I apologize.
That will start in October, and you know what, too, I'm definitely going to do is I'm gonna reach out to you to have you come in to do the laughter yoga with us because that was awesome.
Oh, that would be fantastic. It's one of those things, and not to get off on my thing, like I talk about like hanging in there and believing. I've been doing this since 2006. Laughter has been written about in journals since the 60s, and it's still not really thought of as this resource. And I got to say, sometimes it gets tiring. I'm like, here's the stone and here's my head. But like, so when I want to thank you and your sister for actually for the shout out because seeing that you guys were impacted by it and enjoyed it and like anybody who does, it just fills my heart and I'm like, yes, so yes, I would love to.
It was awesome, it was a great way to end the day, but we're still talking about it because it was just you felt like a kid. It was amazing.
Thank you. Honestly, you don't know, like stuff like that does my heart good because there's so many days when I'm like, okay, and I'm trying to work on manifestations now with money because it's like I keep saying I'm working poor because I am, but I'm trying to go like I deserve money. Money is gonna come to me, all that good stuff. So as long as the laughs are making an impact, though, seriously, that does make me feel good. So I will see your team hopefully soon. We'll talk about that
Awesome,
offline for sure.
awesome.
Well, I want to thank you so much again. I'm going to thank my listeners. Oh, and I forgot to point out at the beginning my Budget Through Life coffee cup from my sponsor, Emily Hickox at Budget Through Life, that does personal finance coaching and one-on-one and for groups. So check out Budget Through Life on social media. But thank you again for my listeners for tuning in. We've got some good stuff planned. I have a lot of different folks coming that are lined up for the summer. I don't really take much of a break. Maybe in July, I'll take a little bit of a break, but I like to keep cranking these out because I really do want to give women a platform to amplify their voice and hopefully impact others. So, as I always say, I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of my wine glass.